Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Welcome back, everyone. We have a very drama-filled reality deep dive here that we're going to be going into. We're going to be looking at last night's airing of the season finale of Summer House, which, oh my goodness, we have so much to discuss here. And then, of course, I'm going to go into the Valley. And I was debating, do I do the Valley first? Because it's obviously going to be a lot shorter. But I can't. Summer House is just way better. And I just want to go into where it's hot. We're going to go into where it's hot right now. I just want to remind you guys that the Forbidden Journey Retreat is this September 18th. If you're looking for opening your heart, transformation beyond anything you've ever known, we're doing some plant medicine journeys. We're going to be doing a lot of healing, inner child work, lots of big stuff, as well as activating your intuitive gifts, getting you more connected to your higher self. If all of that feels like it's in alignment with you, then I would definitely look into coming to this retreat. I'd love to see you there. Link for that is in the description below. Also, if you need any assistance in navigating your own life, your own relationships, your own purpose, your path, whatever's kind of coming up, you can book a one-to-one session with me as well. I'm leaving those links in the description below as well. So without further ado, I think we just really need to jump into it, because what a finale. Like, this was action-packed. It was an extremely good episode. And I literally have just finished watching it. And so I'm fresh. I'm fresh for you guys. I'm fresh. So let me just make sure that everything's good here. I think it is. All right. So we cut back to where we left off last week with Carl and Lindsay sitting by the pool having this discussion. And, Carl, like, where it ends off is Carl kind of lost his cool. And, he's like, it's a lot. It's a lot. And he's like raising his voice and he's getting angry. He's getting frustrated. And so by the pool side here, he continues to say, you're really good at playing the victim, which I think I'm not going to say that I don't completely disagree with him, because from seeing seasons past of Lindsay, I would agree that there is some element of her not really understanding her, taking accountability for her own actions or how she's coming across to people. Really only wanting to see her side. Like, for instance, how it all went down with Danielle, which, again, not a huge fan of, but there was just a coldness towards her. And Lindsay just couldn't seem to get past it. At the same time, though, what he's doing here is absolute projection, because Carl is really good at also playing the victim. So he says, you don't even give a fuck about my emotional feelings around it. So what's happening here is they're discussing his career again, and he's talking about his feelings, and Lindsay's trying to be like, well, we need to talk about like the actual like pros and cons here of, is this a good career choice or not? And he's just, all he can think about is how she's making him feel. And so she denies that and says, well, no, I do give a fuck because I ask you questions. So she interprets her questioning as, I care about you. I'm trying to help you make the best decision. And so this gets really frustrated, and she just leaves and walks into the kitchen. Danielle follows her. And she's just, you can hear Lindsay saying, he just wants me to be something I'm not. And this is like really important, because This is where everything finally tied in for me at the very end, where I finally understood why she feels blindsided. Because at the end of the day, she shouldn't be blindsided by this whole thing. Let's just call a spade a spade. She really shouldn't. But I understand what she means now. It was the last few minutes of the show where it just clicked for me. And I was like, oh, I get it now. I get what she's referring to. So, anyways, she like walks into the house and she's like, he just wants me to be soft and tender, give him hugs, but this is not the time to be giving hugs when we're talking about your career. And I would totally agree with her. Like, if you're making big choices and you've been off work for an extended period of time, like 10 months, then yeah, sorry, but like hugs isn't the way to go. But what's happening here is Carl's using this instant around his career to also tackle this issue where he doesn't feel like he gets softness and tenderness from Lindsay in other areas of the relationship. So even if they weren't talking about his career, I think this is where he's like, he's using it as a jump off point for him to like say, hey, this is what I need from you. But at the same time, he's picking the wrong thing to be making that point because this is not where she should be soft and tender with him, considering all of the circumstances around it. But I can see what he's doing here and why he's keeps saying that. And so, you just hear her and Danielle continuing to talk, like how, they basically are talking about how Carl wants from Lindsay, what he wants from her is not who she is. And this is probably the biggest thing. And like when people get into relationships, people may get into relationships with the idea they have of the person, the potential they see in a person. I am certainly guilty of this. I certainly have fallen in love with a man where I was falling in love with his potential and not who he really is. And so I can totally empathize and understand, like so many of us have been there. I don't think too many of us are guilty free of this, but Danielle says to him, Danielle says to Lindsay, you want something out of him that he is not providing, and he is putting that burden on you more, and it's not fair. So they're talking about like the work and how, she has to make all the money right now, and which is putting a huge stress on her. And what Carl again is failing to realize, that doesn't allow her to be soft and tender with you. So she just says, I'm tired of the coddling. And then and this is where, it's important to note that Carl is so like my ex-boyfriend. Watching him is like watching me and my ex-boyfriend who was an alcoholic. He is no longer, he's recovered, he's sober, he's been sober as far as I know, pretty much soon after we broke up. And I'm super happy for him. He's turned his whole life around and I'm very proud of him. But I can see some of the similarities. So, what Carl wants is a mother. And this is like something Carl needs to work out because how he's going into relationships and why he's being attracted to someone like Lindsay, who's very dominating, very much in control. She knows what she wants, which again, I see a lot of myself in Lindsay. I've done a lot of healing on certain areas that I think she is still needing to do some work on. But it's like you attract those two polarities because one, he's looking to have someone, in a way, he's used to someone controlling him or telling him what to do because he clearly doesn't know how to make his own decisions when it comes to these bigger life choices, or at least he doesn't trust in himself, which is another key sticking point we'll get into later in the show. But, you know, we kind of attract these people that bring out the more toxic sides of ourselves that aren't healthy and end up leading to very codependent relationships. And this relationship is a prime example of codependent relationship behaviors. So then it cuts to Carl out by the beer pong table, explaining, yeah, relationships are tough. And Carl gets a hug from his friend, this guy who's at the beer pong table. So it's like, well, at least Carl's getting hugs from someone. I have to say, this party is a sick party. It's amazing. I think Wes did an amazing job. I mean, just looking at the dry ice, the fire, the lights, everything. It was amazing. But the only person who really couldn't enjoy themselves was Carl. And Carl was said that, I don't bounce back like she does. This is probably one of the loneliest moments I've ever had in this house. And so, what's really important to note here, too, is because he's sober and because he's recovering from a lot of these more alcoholic tendencies to escape his feelings, and now he's being forced to have to sit in his feelings, right? He's starting to really feel the weight of that. And, I really applaud Carl for like, this is a part of the journey of sobriety that's very difficult when you are no longer using escape mechanisms and are having to just sit with your feelings. Well, what he's starting to realize is, wow, I'm really anxious. I'm very stressed out. Like, I don't know how to handle these fear and this anxiety, which is the fear of the future, right? The fear of the unknown. And so this is important. So like how he navigates this, yeah, he needs a partner who understands this. Lindsay is not the partner who's going to understand this. I don't think she realized, again, what she was signing up for when you sign up to be in relationship with someone on a sober journey. This is something that has to be taken very, very seriously. And it's a very tender journey that can easily have someone slip off the path. And so I do want to say hats off to Carl for staying sober. I know he's California sober, but what he went through and the fact that he didn't pick up a drink, as far as I know, I think is very commendable. And so I don't want to take that away from him. But then we cut out to the outdoor couch where Paige, Amanda, and Sierra are just kind of talking about West being in their lives now because West and Sierra, are they gonna, they're growing closer, and they're talking about how she was meeting all of his friends at the party, and she talks about her fear of rejection. And Amanda says something here. She says to her, "Don't be so hard on yourself. It doesn't have to be dating for marriage." And I think that's what everyone approaches dating with now, and it's like people don't want to get into a relationship unless they know for certain this person is going to be the person I can potentially marry. And it's like that's the whole point of dating, is to figure it out. And no one wants to even commit to one person long enough to find out if there's any potential there. Like, that isn't that what the whole dating process is about? And I think this is a really cool point that Amanda brought up. And it's something that I've noticed. I've even seen it in myself. Hey, I'm guilty of doing it too, where I'm just like, really kind of, I don't know, just completely like pulling every part of a guy like apart to say like, okay, is this going to work? Is that going to work? And it's like, you can't do that. That's not realistic. That's not how dating works. And dating's supposed to be fun. Dating's supposed to be like the happiest part, like it's where all the fun is. So then we cut to, okay, now the party's ending. Paige is telling everyone they have to go home. And so we cut out to the backyard where Kyle and Carl are by the pool. And Carl's talking about how he doesn't believe Lindsay has embraced his society. And it's hard for him at times. And I would agree here with him. I don't think that Lindsay has been able to embrace it fully in the way that I think he needs. Okay. So I think that's a fair statement by Carl. He says that he's understanding about her abandonment issue and tries to remind her how proud of her he is. And so it's interesting because he's used to, I think the way he was parented was of this like cheerleader kind of energy, almost like, I hate to even say it, but you know how we have like the participation trophies now, and it's like, it doesn't matter what you did. It's so great, and either way, one of the things that is so important to note that this is something I've seen, and it really made me think like that is how parenting really should go down. Because all the inner child work that I've done and all the inner child work that I help others go through, when a child of yours comes to you and says, "Hey, look what I've done," whether it's a drawing or they've made something or they're going to perform some kind of trick or dance move or whatever it might be. When they do it for you and they show it to you, they're looking for your validation. And the best way to actually approach this is to turn it back on the child and say, "Well, how does it make you feel?" And this is really important. So it teaches the child to start looking within themselves for their own validation to see how it really truly makes them feel, and not about, am I pleasing someone else? Am I making someone else proud of me? And so really kind of seeking that outside validation. Sorry, that was a total sidebar, but I just felt like that is important because I feel like Carl was definitely coddled as a child by his mother. And it's coming out. You know what? My ex who I dated, same thing. When his mother came to visit us, and lovely woman, lovely woman. But I saw the dynamic and I was like, well, this is why we have the problems that we do. I saw the mothering, the way she would just do everything for him. And I'm like, just totally coddled, and like he could do no wrong. There was nothing he could do wrong. And I'm like, this is so unrealistic. And so it created a softer version of a man who I ended up dating, which again, I was a very masculine oriented feminine female, and he was more of a feminine oriented male. And so our polarities were totally out of whack, but out of whack enough to kind of relate to one another. So um he believes that Lindsay thinks he uses his sobriety as an excuse, and how she talks about her own trauma, saying that she was strong and she just got through it. And that's how he needs to get through it. And he explains how he thinks that we're just different in how we navigate our traumas. And okay, that's a fair statement. I think that's a fair statement. We are all going to navigate our traumas differently. We're all built differently. We're all wired differently. We have different environments that we grew up in. But like it's just what he's looking for, though, from her is not what he needs when it comes to his career. Now, I can't say that he's wrong in needing a supportive partner who's softer. Like, I totally get that. And I think that's a valid thing that he wants. But the way he's acting, though, isn't bringing in or giving space for a woman to do that for him. So then we cut to Sierra and Wes in the bedroom talking about pet names, and Sierra's just talking about trying to figure out what is significant to Wes because she doesn't know, like she's like, you want me to meet your parents? You want me to come to Thanksgiving? I'm just trying to figure out what's significant. So if you call me baby or you say like whatever, like what does it actually mean? And this is just a pure example of how like a lot of guys will just say things because they know they make you feel good. And like the woman will always interpret it to mean something more. And this is where things always go wrong. So anyways, we cut and everyone's going to sleep. Carl walks in, Lindsay's already asleep, and you can literally just feel the tension in that bedroom. It is like, I think one of the reasons why I am so enthralled with this particular season is because it is bringing me back to the moments where I experienced some of the deepest trauma I've had as an adult when it comes to my relationships. And I'll be honest, I think one of the reasons why it's been so hard for me to get back into a relationship is because of the trauma experience dating and living with an alcoholic. It's like I am like so hyper aware of any red flags. I'm so hyper aware of anything that won't make me feel safe, and I'm not saying that's the healthiest thing. I'm not saying that's the healthiest thing. And I've gotten better at that. But, like this, it can be really traumatizing. And so, and I want to make sure to say, like, he's sober now, but he's also displaying still characteristics that I saw. However, I will also say Lindsay is not without fault. She also is displaying some characteristics. And we're going to have to get into some of this in a second because obviously I started this series only a couple episodes ago, which means we never got to really talk about the beginning where she was questioning his sobriety, which was so wrong. And the way she was going about it and the way they had their communication the next day when she was sober was just like, ooh, this is not good. This is not good at all. So, but when it boils down to it, both of these two are in the wrong, and both of these two should not be together. So so in the morning they do their awkward exchange. Like he's like, so how did you sleep? She's like, good. And so I'm just trying to read my notes here. Am I saying like Lindsay, she's aware that they won't? Oh, Lindsay basically cuts to saying here that, she's aware that they're not always going to be planning a wedding. She's aware that Carl's not going to always be looking for a job and trying to figure out his career. And so in her mind, the way she's navigating this is like, this is just one of those rough spots that we're going to have to get through. And it's not always going to be like this when we're married. There's ebbs and flows, and that's why she's being so patient with it all. But this isn't good because the way you guys are navigating the difficult parts of life are not healthy. Like the way that they're navigating this isn't good. Neither feels good about this. So Carl goes for a run, Lindsay and Danielle go get coffee, and everyone's goes into the pool, and then we cut back to when everyone's back. Lindsay and Carl are now in the kitchen, and and it's so awkward. Oh my god, like this. I don't know if you guys have been in this situation. I'm sure you have been in this situation where you're in a relationship and it's just you've had a blowout the night before and it's just unable to, like, how do we move past this? How do we enjoy the rest of our day? So it's they're talking about whether or not they're going to go to Montauk with everyone else today, and Lindsay kind of doesn't want to. She's not really in the mood, which the reason why she's not in the mood is because of, again, another weekend where there's just the talks are going in circles and she's not able to enjoy herself. And I will say, though, they need to be having these conversations. It just sucks that it's always coming up when they're on their weekend where they're trying to have fun. Again, that's where the cameras are, so I get it. But Carl explains how he couldn't snap out of it, and it was the worst time in the history of him going to a party. So that's interesting. Well, it's probably the worst time in history because you're sober and you're actually dealing with very difficult life situations now, feelings that are very important to not escape from. And so this is him really having to go through it for the first time without using alcohol as an escape, like really having to face that, which I find is really interesting here because I might be wrong, but if I remember correctly, he sober, or at least trying to be sober, when his brother passed away, and I remember that was a really tough time for him. But Lindsay says to him, what you're looking for in discussions around your career is just not realistic. She's like, I base my questions off of who I am and that's who I've always been. And Carl's like, well, I just need something different. And I'm just like, Carl, like, this is where Carl doesn't have a leg to stand on because this is who Lindsay's been. I mean, anyone who's watched Summer House from the beginning knows this is Lindsay. This is who she is. If you expected her to be anything different, like, that's unrealistic. And so I don't know what Carl was thinking when he, one, got into this relationship, and then two, decided to propose to her, to get married to her, because what he's wanting from her is just, I don't think she's in a place to be capable of giving it, at least not in the dynamic that he's coming into the relationship as. So he says to her, I don't want coaching or questioning in my wife and fiance, and I don't think that's what I signed up for with you. Okay. Okay. Let's break this down for a second. I understand. And this is something I'm very, very cognizant about when I go on dates, is like, I have to turn my coaching hat off. Like, I have to take that hat off. I have to turn that dial all the way down. And I have to make sure that the coacher and the healer does not come out of me when I'm on dates. And it is something I've had to work on. I've noticed it's when it's the thing is, it's a part of who I am. It's always going to be there. But when you're dating, it's certainly not the thing you want to be presenting with or coming forward with right out of the gate, because then you're already starting the whole thing on a really bad dynamic. So I understand what he's saying to that extent, but he's asking for her advice on career direction. And he should be, because that's what couples do, especially if they're going to be married. So you do need to have her coaching and questioning you to some degree, just as if she were going to be making decisions, you would be also in the right to be kind of coaching or questioning to some degree. And so Carl explains how he wants someone who cares how he feels. Okay, that's a valid statement. And I can see how Lindsay has a bit of a colder side to her. We've seen it in past seasons where she's very dismissive of other people's feelings. Like, for instance, with Danielle last year, when Danielle was trying to just be really vulnerable with her and Lindsay just was cold as ice. Like, I remember watching that going, holy crap, like, how is she just not, like, opening her heart just a little bit here? And so I can understand that to some degree, but you know, he then says, "You make me feel this way." And Lindsay stops him and says, "No, no, no, we're not doing that again. Those are fighting words." And she's basically saying, like, you can't tell me I make you feel a certain way because your feelings are your feelings and my feelings are my feelings. And she's absolutely right in that. And so she's trying to correct that so that he doesn't go there. And he realizes, but what he interprets that as is, you're shutting me down again. But she's not shutting you down. She's correcting the way you guys are communicating so that it doesn't go into a pointing the finger kind of thing, like, you're the reason why I feel this way. You're the problem. And so Kyle, oh God, Kyle enters the house at this point, claiming to go need to use the bathroom for number two. But I don't know if that was really the case. And he just knew that there was a discussion going on and he wanted to come in and eavesdrop, but he told everyone else that that's the reason why he came into the house, because he certainly didn't go to the bathroom. He just starts like cleaning up. When does Kyle just clean up the house? The dude was absolutely eavesdropping here. So Kyle is eavesdropping on the conversation now, and he's hearing while Carl goes, "Well, do you even trust that I'm going to figure this out? My career longevity." Like, he goes, "Do you trust that I can be successful?" And Lindsay says, "I think you could be successful at a lot of different things." Of course, he hears could, which I think was a completely valid thing for Lindsay to say, given Carl's history. Like, Carl wants her, the level of disillusionment in this relationship between these two is next level, because Carl wants her to see him in a light that he doesn't act in. So I'm sorry, but if you've had issues where keeping a job, you've gotten fired, you had issues with when you worked for Kyle at Loverboy, you know and then now you're also like, it's taking you 10 months, you don't even know what you're doing, and the suggestions that you come up with are absolutely horrible. Like, yeah, I think any person would question your level of success or your capacity for success until you can prove that. Now, does that mean he's not capable? I think there's room for capability in there, but the point is that he hasn't really demonstrated it. So how can she definitively say yes? He, of course, doesn't like that. And so he goes off and he says, "See, could." He goes, "That's not the champion. You're even questioning yourself." And so it's like, no, Carl, she's not questioning herself. She's questioning you because you've given her a lot of reason to question you. And so Carl then says, "I'm concerned," because he's really concerned because of how they're not able to resolve anything. And rightfully so. They're really not able to resolve anything. They're constantly going around in circles. He says, "We need to be really honest about it." And I'm like, oh, what an interesting statement. So again, it's like each of them are in different moments in time throughout their communication process, are saying things to the other that that they believe they need to be doing and are still not doing themselves. So, because Carl has been nothing but honest with her. He's been very honest with Kyle, very honest with Amanda, very honest with the boys sometimes, but he hasn't really been honest with Lindsay. And so, so anyways, Lindsay goes, "So are you saying that you don't want to get married?" And Carl says, "I don't say that." And he's like, "I didn't say that." And I'm like, oh, "Okay, we just finished saying, I think we need to be really honest with each other. And here you're saying, like, you should be saying, I am questioning whether we should be getting married at this point in time." All you have to say is, "I don't know if we're ready to get married in 2 months." But he doesn't say that. And again, I understand this isn't an easy conversation. This is a very difficult conversation to have. But look, he's just, you see here that his inability to resolve conflict really scares him. Like their inability to resolve conflict, and that he's having second thoughts, right? He says that. And he mentions how that, like, the day that they're having this conversation is actually their anniversary to the day they got engaged last year, and how different things are. And she's like, "Well, what do you need from me?" And he said, "In this moment, a hug, if that's okay." And I got to tell you guys, I cringed so hard in this moment watching this scene. This was one of the most cringiest gut-wrenching scenes I've had to like just watch. I felt for her in this moment. And okay, we got to talk about this because this is where he's acting like a little boy. This is his inner child coming out. And she is in full on adult mode. And because, she's realizing, oh, I have to coddle him in this moment. And it's not that he can't have hugs from her and that he doesn't deserve to have hugs. The way he goes about it, the way he treats it all, it's like he reverts to being this little boy. And literally verbatim, this is what he says. When she goes to hug him, after he says, if that's okay, it's like, just ask for what you want. Like you're still tiptoeing, like you're not like just commanding what it is you know what? I want a hug. I really need a hug. Just say it, and if he just like be a little bit more affirmative, a little bit more in his own convictions, but he's not. He's still like waffling. And so she goes to hug him and then he says harder. Oh my God. I, the cringe I was feeling in here. Then he goes, squeeze me, please. One more squeeze. The the level of cringe of this moment is so hard to get past because I'll tell you, I literally just dated a guy briefly who, within the second date of us hanging out together, turned on the baby voice and started talking to me in this cutesy baby voice. And I just was like, what are you doing? And, and he continued to do it to the point where I have finally had to tell him, you need to stop doing that. You need to stop talking to me like that. Like, I'm not dating a baby. I don't want to make out with a baby. I want to like have a man, like, and also like, I'll just say this, voice is a very important thing to me. It is probably the thing that will be a deal breaker for me when it comes to like instant connection. So if I hear a guy who's got a more feminine, softer voice, I probably will not go out with him. And that's just me. It's just me. And I'm not saying it's right, it's wrong. It's just a preference. And so for me, voice is super, super important. And so when he did that, I was like, you're going into like baby mode. Like I could already see, and there were certain factors within his life that were going on that I was already questioning that were making me realize I think he's going to want a mother. He's going to expect me to take care of him and meet all these needs and treat him like a boy. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. So like this even just hits home a little bit too much too soon for me, just considering someone who I recently just dated briefly. But this moment is like, you know, the way he speaks to her, asks for things, is from this place of the inner child. And the where Lindsay is at and the woman that she is, that's not going to fly. These two couldn't be worse matches for each other. Like, I get it. They love each other, but they are so oppositely matched. And also, Carl, like, just that's going to be something he has to work on. Like, that's just no, I don't think any woman really wants that. It's just gross. Um, like, it just shows that you don't have a backbone, you don't have a spine. And if you don't have a backbone or a spine, like, then a woman's going to be able to walk all over you. And guess what? If a woman can walk all over you, she doesn't respect you. And what do men need the most to feel loved? Respect. And that's the way men feel loved. Men feel loved by being respected. And he's not doing things in a way that would command respect from his partner. At least I want to say in this moment right here, right now. So this was just super awkward for me. Then he says to her, "You used to like my hugs." And I'm just like, no, I can't, my skin crawls from this scene. Like I tell you, my skin crawls. So anyways, they all disperse and everyone's kind of cleaning up. I got so many notes here for you guys. Like, so everyone's packing up and getting ready to go. And oh my God, the awkwardness in Lindsay and Carl's room, the silence, the deafening silence, the tension of them just like packing up and like getting things ready. It's just I couldn't feel worse for either of them. Like it's just I feel so bad for both of them of where they're at right now. And so you know, Carl leaves. I think guess he's going to put stuff in the car. And so Danielle walks in and to the Lindsay's bedroom and they start talking. And so Lindsay's asking her, or sorry, Danielle is asking Lindsay, "Are you coming to Montauk?" Because I think everyone is going to Montauk to kind of close out the summer. I mean, cameras aren't going there, but that's where everyone's going. But again, Lindsay said to Carl in the beginning, like, I don't really want to go to Montauk. I'm not in the mood. But what we find out here is that she actually would go to Montauk because she wants to hang out with everyone. She's just not in the mood of dealing with Carl. So she starts telling her all about her conversation with Carl and how exhausted she is and how they've been in couples therapy since November. And how she's been working on her tone. She's been working on her delivery. She's been working on not getting activated. Not props to Lindsay. She's done some work here. Like you can tell she's taken things to heart. Now, does that mean she's perfect? No, clearly, she's going to have slip up moments where she's human. And I'm not saying that's right and I'm not excusing it, but like, you know, you can also see the effort of growth. You can see that she's trying. And so Lindsay says it just feels like he feels so bad and he wants to make me feel so bad and then expects me to go give him a hug. And this is like the true thing. It's like you can't like go in on your partner and tell them like how shitty they make you feel and then ask them to hug you. And it's just like there's it's doesn't work that way. So then Carl wants a partner. He wants intimacy. That's what she's telling Danielle. And she goes, "Well, then don't yell at me. Maybe I'll want to fuck you." And it's like, yeah, okay. So a lot of I'm going to open up a little bit about my past history here. My relationship with my ex, who was an alcoholic, we started off extremely sexually like active. Like we had some of the best sex, it was so hot, so heavy. Just great. But as the relationship continued onward and as the alcoholism started to rear its head and I had to deal with the demon that came out of him when he was drinking, I started to no longer feel safe. And so because I no longer felt safe, I wasn't trusting him. I didn't he would kept saying, "Oh, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink." And then, a few weeks would go by, he wouldn't drink and then he would start drinking. And then, like, okay, he drank and then all of the things that he said didn't matter. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when it comes to women, your words matter. We go back to Sierra and West when she was in the bedroom with him saying like, "I'm just trying to figure out what's significant to you. You call me this, you call me that." Words matter to women. And honestly, as a man, your word is your bond. If your actions don't align with your words, you are no longer safe for me as a woman. I'm looking for consistency. I need to see your actions lining up with your words. And I think that should be the same for men when it comes to women. Like you want to date someone who's true to their word, right? And so what that does as a female is that really shuts down my ability to feel safe and trust you. And if I can't trust you, I'm certainly not going to open up the most sacred part of me to you. And I no longer I'm going to start to feel attracted to you. So what happens is, Carl, I see very similar dynamics here where again, he reverts to being a little boy. He needs her to make some of the decisions, which later on he goes to talk about how controlling she is. But it's like, yes, I would agree that she definitely has a controlling personality. But at the same time, it's like you are also making it so that you can be controlled. You're actually asking for her to make certain decisions for you that you wouldn't, that you should be making. And so this is like something that's like, I think it's just really important to kind of talk about, because my sex life went to almost nothing with my partner after. Like I didn't want him to touch me. I didn't want him anywhere near me. Like the only time I would like want to cuddle with him is if I knew it wasn't going to lead to making out. Like if we were just going to sit and watch a TV show together, like we used to watch Survivor together. We loved watching Survivor together. It was our thing. We like that was fine, and I would cuddle up with him and I loved that. But as soon as it came to intimacy, like in a more sexual nature, as like, everything just shut down inside of me. And I was like, ew, gross. Like, I don't want this. And I felt so bad for him because I'm like, that's not a good place for him. Like, I don't want to be making him feel like he's unwanted, that he's undesirable. And it was something that I had to struggle with of like, okay, I this isn't how a relationship should be, and I wanted out of that relationship so much. But I also was trapped because financially I couldn't afford to move. I was in a really shitty place where I left my job to try to start my own company. And in that time period, I was barely making any money. And so, living together was how I was only able to survive. And sometimes he needed to pay some of my bills, like just kind of top me up on the end of it. And so I felt trapped. And that's actually one of the reasons why I was like, I will never be financially dependent on anyone ever again because of being trapped in that situation. But, so this is where she says to him, um, like, oh, maybe I'd want to fuck you then. So then she goes on to say something very, very valid here. She explains about confidence and how he's constantly looking for her to build his confidence up, right? But she's like, it's just the same as happiness. You can't expect others to be happy for you if you're not happy on the inside. So she's completely valid here. So she's like, I feel like he's constantly looking to me to make him feel confident. And he's solely dependent on me boosting that confidence. And that can get very exhausting. So this is where a lot of the codependency is coming into play. And she's like, I have nothing left in the tank for him. And this is exactly how I felt in my relationship. I felt like I was constantly trying to take care of him, constantly trying to make him feel better, build him up. Like, no, you can do it. And it's like, who's doing it for me? What about me? And it's just like you're constantly doing that for someone else. And I think this is something that's very typical. I'm not going to say it's across the board because I can't possibly know, but from a few of the people in my life that I know that are recovered alcoholics, I can see that there is a definite need to have their confidence boosted. Or they don't feel confident in who they are and constantly looking for that outside validation. And it's a lot of anxiety about how to navigate life and make big choices. There seems to be like a really difficult a connection point there. So they all leave for Montauk, and Lindsay agrees, okay, I'm going to go to Montauk, but doesn't want to drive with Carl. Okay, this is a pretty shitty thing that she does actually in the driveway in front of everyone. So Carl's all excited, oh, we're going to Montauk. Okay, great. And then she gets out there and she's like, yeah, but I'm not driving with Carl. That's the contingency. And it's like, oh, you don't do that to your partner. You don't air that stuff out in front of everyone. One, it makes everyone else feel awkward. Number two, it's not cool. So I didn't like that she did that. And so they all leave and now summer's over. Well, cameras, that's where it should have ended. But of course, we all know Carl called off the wedding only a few days later. So they pick cameras back up, and we are picking back up 3 days later. So Kyle and Carl are now going for coffee. And Carl is at a loss. He's sitting there with Kyle and he's like, I'm unable, like he's not saying he's like, we are unable to resolve conflict and communication challenges. And he starts describing Sunday night, and he starts going into great detail about, the demon that Lindsay is, about her like so hastily moving stuff, like breaking, like, they had water bottles that were glass and they were smashing in the car, and how they storm off to the apartment. The elevator door closes on his face. And then he's like, okay, so I just slept in a different room. And it's like, that is not great behavior on Lindsay's part. But at the same time, Carl, I'm pretty sure you weren't the greatest, like you weren't all a flower and a rose in the car on the way home either. And I don't like that he's trying to paint her in such a negative light when we've seen Carl go off, and we've seen him recently like being very gaslighty and manipulative. So I would just say that both of their behavior is probably very toxic. So uh he then goes on to talk about how like the only person I didn't get along with this summer is my fiance, which is that's a pretty big statement, and it's a pretty big realization. And then he goes, it hit me like a ton of bricks when Lindsay says, this is who I am, I'm not going to change. And it's like, why did it just hit you like a ton of bricks now, Carl? Like, I don't know. Like it's not even like you guys have been friends for 8 years. You've been on the show with her. You've seen her in other relationships. You know who she is. I'm not saying she's the greatest person, but you know who she is. Like this was just not a match made in heaven by any stretch of the imagination. And so I'm just like, wow. Like then he goes on to say, this is a revelation I may have been running from since the beginning of our relationship. It's like, oh, dear Lord. And so I think, here's the other problem. He really went into his sobriety like hardcore just before they got together, right? Like he's like, he made the choice. I'm going to become sober. And I can't remember how long he was sober for before they started like getting back together. I can't imagine. I know it was under a year. I know it was under a year. I think it's somewhere between 6 months and a year. And so, truthfully, whenever anyone is going through sobriety, there's a reason why they tell you not to get into a relationship within the first year. Like it is absolutely frowned upon and not suggested at all. And I think that as a result, I think he used his relationship as a crutch to soothe the emotions he was going through and the feelings that were coming up from having to face the fact that he's not drinking to numb his feelings. And so he kind of used the dating and the feel good of like, well, this is someone I know in this relationship, I'm just going to kind of dive into it. And so, we then find out that apparently back in January, Lindsay had a big fight and Lindsay gave the ring back, which really hurt him. And understandably so. I can totally understand why that would hurt his feelings. And it's something that he can't get over and that he can't forget. So that's a trauma that they haven't worked through. And that's just because I don't think that they would see eye to eye on that or Lindsay would ever understand. I don't think Lindsay's the most compassionate, empathetic person that in the world. And so again, Carl needs someone who's extremely compassionate and empathetic. And so it's not going to happen. It's like asking oil and water to mix. It just won't. And then Kyle says, if you feel like you're putting in the work and she's not meeting you halfway, marriage isn't going to solve that. Okay, so he's right, but let's be honest, Lindsay is putting in the work as well. It's just that they're not meant to be together and their communication sucks balls. Like this is one of the, in a sense of like, one, there's no way their communication can get better if Carl's not willing to say the hard things, if Carl's not willing to be honest. And he's really conflict avoidant. And so it's very hard for communication to get better if you're conflict avoidant. Lindsay, on the other hand, has no problem being honest and truthful about what she's thinking or what she's feeling. So this is, I would say that the reason why they're having more communication challenges is because Carl is still being too conflict avoidant. It makes me wonder where this may have been. Like again, I just don't think they should have been together. Period. And I don't think I don't really think there's a world in where this works, unless they came together much further down the road where they had both done enough of their own healing work. But again, like that's just speculation, and that does no one any good. So then Kyle says to her, do you want to marry her? And Carl's like, he's holding his fingers over his mouth and he's like, I don't know. So I want to point this out. As I was watching Carl sit there with he just had his fingers over his mouth like this. This is really important for any of you guys out there who do like coaching or healing. This is an important observation, even like in your friends. Okay. Like if someone's talking to you, pay attention to where their fingers are pointing when they're talking, because their body will know what is really going on. So for instance, if someone's like talking to me and saying, like, I don't know why I'm so like whatever, blah, 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 blah. And they're doing this. It's like, oh, okay, the heart issue. The heart is an issue. Like their heart's closed down or they're afraid of rejection or something heart related. Okay. He's got his fingers over his mouth. And so I can tell that he's like realizing he's trying to almost stop what he really wants to say. It's almost like he's pointing like there's words in here that really want to come out, but they're not coming out because I'm stopping them. Like, do I really want to marry her? I don't know. It's like, no, you do know. Come on. At this point, Carl knows he doesn't want to marry her. He just doesn't know how to navigate it. That's what he doesn't know. So then we cut back to Carl and Lindsay's apartment. They're sitting down. Lindsay decides to start the conversation first. And so, she starts off by saying, like, I don't want to fight. And, she starts to question, like, okay, I'm trying to understand Carl. Like, like when I question him, he feels belittled, right? By her questioning. But then she's like, okay, but where she like doesn't understand, she's like, but where did this come from then? Because it wasn't always this way, which is true. Because she's like, I was your sounding board for when you were having issues with Loverboy and you didn't know if you should leave the company or not. And so she's absolutely 100% correct here. You can't have it both ways, Carl. You can't go to her when you need her. And then when you still need her, but you want her to just be your cheerleader, it's like you came to her in a place where it was again about your career and she was your sounding board. You were asking her for her advice. She was questioning you. She was helping you through it. Because it wasn't directly related to her, you were able to like use that. But now, because she's directly involved, and it's about her future as well, this is going to be an important thing. So you can't say that when she questions you, she makes you feel a certain way when you were okay with her questioning you at the beginning when you needed the advice. And again, this just goes to speak to the fact that Carl doesn't trust his own judgment. He doesn't trust his own discernment. He doesn't know how to make the big decisions and navigate them. And clearly, Lindsay does. Lindsay's very good at looking at everything from all points of view and navigating them. And so, what happens here is really interesting because what I'm realizing is, she then goes on to say, then in the last 2 weeks, your needs changed. She clarifies, which is actually okay. It's okay. But then she's like, but then you start treating me like I'm the enemy because your needs have changed. So I understand where she's coming from in this. And Carl then goes on to explain, well, he feels overwhelmed and anxious about making a big career choice and is just asking her to be a little more comforting, a little bit more excited, a little bit more positive versus the questioning. And so she feels like this is just something that's come up in the last 2 weeks. This is clearly something he's been dealing with since the beginning of the relationship. And so this is where this is where a lot of the disconnect comes from. This is where everything starts to break down because Lindsay's looking at it through the lens of, okay, we're just talking about the last 2 weeks. That's where the real problems are. And Carl's like, no, the real problems have been here from the beginning. Right. And so then, he goes on to say, like this has been going on for a long time. And he raises his voice and he's starting to say, your sobriety, you're pigeonholing yourself. So he's now basically, this is what he's doing. He's mimicking Lindsay, all of the things. So she would bring up his sobriety. She would bring up the fact that you're pigeonholing yourself. You're not an actor. What do you mean you want to do that? A sober bar? That's never going to work. She talks about cigars. She's like, what do you mean you want to do that? Okay, let's just break this down for a second. Because this is where Carl's like, I've come to you and I've had all these different ideas and you've shot everything down. You haven't been supportive about one thing. And I understand from his point of view, he's like, I need a supportive partner to help me navigate. Like you should want your partner to be like cheerleading you on. I get that. But all of his ideas sucked. Like they were horrible ideas. They were like, no. Abort mission. Like, the only thing I will say is I don't like that she questioned his sobriety. I don't think, and this is where I don't lean towards Lindsay at all, is that, if you're going to date a sober person, you've got to understand what you're getting yourself involved with. So just as the same way as Carl, needed to understand who he was getting involved with, which is Lindsay. She's not the soft and tender woman that he's looking for. She also had to realize I'm dealing with someone who's going through sobriety. And if he's sober, that means he's dealing with a lot of demons now that used to be masked through alcoholism. And alcoholism is no longer there, which means what's going to happen? we're going to have to deal with this very tenderly and slowly. So I understand that part. And I completely, again, they are just not good partners for what each other's needs are in this moment. So, um, he claims that she doesn't make him feel good about it, and then he brings up Sunday night when they get home from Montauk where the cameras had like ended, everything had ended, and then you get home and he's like, this is where I don't like what he's doing here because he's trying to expose Lindsay. He's trying to like make her out to look a certain way on camera. Whereas, like, listen, you don't need to expose her. We all know who Lindsay is, like we've seen her activated, we've seen all this stuff. What I think needed to be exposed was also Carl's role in this. And it's like, look, you're no shining knight in all of this either. Like you're both equally to blame. But I think what now becomes clear is he had a deep fear, and I think this is why he took him so long to call off the wedding, is that we find out later that he had a deep fear of being canceled, and her spinning the whole narrative, which she did. Let's call she did do it. Okay, so basically brings up Sunday night, and then Lindsay says, why did you propose to me? You've known me for 8 years. I'm the same person you proposed to. She goes, I'm confused. And okay, so this is what I guess they were talking about in the car ride on the Sunday, or after Montauk. And Carl says, honestly, I don't know why I proposed to you. And so this is where she's like, well, I'm going to record you because you're saying really mean things. You're saying really like horrible things. And I think it's because, look, Carl tried to present himself as this very like, I'm in charge of my emotions. I'm not getting angry, all this stuff. I'm not going to go off the handle. Whereas we could see this is Carl's not being authentic to his own feelings, right? Which I'm sure is part of the process of navigating sobriety. Like you don't want to be the angry person who blows up at people. I can totally respect that. But at the same time, the only way you can navigate your feelings is by acknowledging that you feel angry and actually finding healthier ways to express them. But he's not, because he's repressing the real anger. And so we all saw how that would come through in very manipulative ways where he was trying to gaslight Lindsay. So you're holding your anger in, you're trying to look all calm and collected, but how it's actually coming through to us in the audience, and we see it very clearly in the last few episodes, is, well, now you've turned to gaslighting your partner so that she'll explode and you can be like, see, there's the angry person, not me. And that we all saw. So like, it's like, I understand what he's trying to do here because he's scared. He's clearly very, very scared of Lindsay. And let's be honest, I'd be a little scared of Lindsay too. Okay, the woman is a strong woman, and she does not back down. She's a fighter. But at the same time, this doesn't bode well for Carl either, because you don't have a backbone in any of this. You don't know how to navigate this. So then let me see here. So then Lindsay says, I'm trying to understand desperately what you need from me so that I can adjust. But it's sometimes clouded by when you get angry and raise your voice or sling insults or say mean things, which we've seen Carl do very passive aggressively. And then Carl says, it's like you're living in two worlds. There's reality, and then there's what you spin reality to be. He goes, you're really gifted at playing victim. You've been gifted at that since I've known you. Whoa. Okay. So tell me what you really think without telling me, Carl, because that was a pretty strong statement. Now, let's be honest here. I have absolutely seen Lindsay play a little victim when she's like not taking accountability for some of her actions and why it's gotten her into the situation she's gotten into, right? There is certainly a certain level of disillusionment on Lindsay's part. But Carl, if there's anyone who's been playing the major victim in all of this, it's you, at least from what we've seen in all of the episodes, right? It's hard for us to really speculate on what's going on behind the scenes. And I would guess that it's a very equal balance of toxicity on either part of them. But you know, Carl then says he feels like it's the Lindsay show and that he's just paying rent to be a part of it. Well, Carl, you don't do a really good job of standing up for yourself. You don't do a really good job of asking for what you need. And really kind of doing it from a place of conviction and commandment. Like the problem is that he kind of his personality and where he's at in his healing journey lends itself easily to being walked all over. And if you partner up with someone like Lindsay, well, you're just going to get trampled into the ground. And so, and again, I'm not saying that's right, but that's just the reality of the relationship dynamic that they're in. So, Lindsay then goes, you can tell she's so hung up on this being about the last 2 weeks. And she's like, she keeps bringing it back. She goes, yeah, but the last 2 weeks, like, and he's like, no, it's about the whole time. He goes, Carl feels controlled on how he's doing his career. And then he lists off all the things that she's said to him that we haven't really seen. I think we've seen a little bit, but he says, you called me a loser. You called me a little bitch. You called me a little baby, a mama's boy. Go run home to your parents. All right, so we have to address this because this is definitely a very toxic trait that Lindsay fell into in her own toxic masculinity as a woman. This is something that's a woman who's heavily in her masculine energy. When they're dating a man who's much more in his feminine energy, she'll go for those low blows, and that's mean. And of course, has been, Carl been acting like a little boy? Well, yes, we just go back just, 15, 20 minutes ago when I was talking about the hug scene, like it was cringe. It was like, he was acting like a little boy. It was all of his inner child coming out in that moment. Right. And it's hard because this isn't right. Like, no, Lindsay shouldn't be saying these things to, especially your fiance. Like, you shouldn't be talking this way to your fiance at all. But at the same time, Carl wants a mother. Your behavior, Carl, is acting like you want someone to mother you. You want someone to coddle you. So he's acting in a way that also warrants that kind of mama's boy, kind of go run back to your parents. I understand where it's coming from because he is acting that way and he's not taking ownership for the fact of like, let me just figure out how to deal with my stuff. And he doesn't know to. He's always going to other people. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with going to your parents for advice, especially big stuff. Like there's nothing wrong with using your parents as a sounding board. I would absolutely actually encourage that. But it sounds like he runs to his mother a lot. And and again, I dated someone who was coddled by their mother and would do very similar things. And so I am very well versed in this area. So Carl's then goes on to say, see, here's the thing. Carl looks at Lindsay as like she's trying to control his career, and she's not. She's not trying to control his career. She's trying to advise him, but he is internalizing it as controlling because Lindsay is a controlling personality and he probably does feel controlled in other areas. And he's projecting it all into this one area, whereas like she's actually in her right to be talking to you this way when it comes to your career and asking you those questions. But he's like, I don't want to continue to do this with you in a sense, like we continue to trigger and hurt one another. He goes, I don't want to live like that. Fair statement. Totally fair statement here on Carl's part. And I think like, like it's a big realization. And I will say good on him for saying the things that really should be said in this moment. Like this is the conversation you should have had months ago, Carl. I mean, at least he's finally having it now, but he's having it with cameras around. And clearly like, he was having cameras around so that he could like, I guess make sure that it was seen by everyone. And for him to say that he didn't plan it that way, bullshit, you did, but it's okay. Like, I don't fault you for that. Just own it. Given how he feels, I don't fault him for that, but like own it at least. And again, it just boils down to him not being in his own power, like not being comfortable in his own skin. So he's like, I'm not ready to get married. So Carl's like, he's hurt, he's unhappy, and he doesn't feel like their communication is going to improve. So, all valid. And I think Carl should be feeling this way. And I think it's a very accurate assessment, a very accurate assessment on Carl's part. So Lindsay again, still hung up on the 2 weeks thing and talks about like, not quitting and she's not a quitter. And, this is, you have to put work in. This is what relationships are all about. Like, relationships aren't easy. They require work. And she's absolutely right. You're not supposed to give up and you're not supposed to quit, but this is not the situation. Like you've also got to learn when like you're working with material that is never going to adhere together. Like this is never going to connect. And so realizes at this point, Carl has made his decision, right? She's realizing you've made your decision. And she makes it very clear to him that he understands you made this decision. Now I'll tell you why she's doing that. This is probably unconscious to her, but she's doing that because Carl doesn't feel confident in his decision making. And this is where she's trying to make him this this is a little manipulative on her part because she knows this is a weakness of his and she knows that he struggles with making big life decisions for himself. So let's all just for a second give Carl a little credit here. He's finally making a very important, very correct decision, for both him and Lindsay. So I cannot deny him that at all. But she is also making sure that he carries the brunt of this, which all be said, he needs to carry something because she's been carrying a load of this relationship. So but what she's doing here is in a way, I think she's like trying to test him. Are you really sure? Are you really sure this is what you want? Um, but then Carl says, something very simple and poignant. I don't make you happy. Like he's pointing out to her, I don't make you happy. And that couldn't be further, like that couldn't be further. That is as close to the truth as you can get. Carl isn't making you happy, Lindsay. Why are you fighting for it? Like why? And we find out in a little bit why she was fighting for it so much. But it's true. And so she thinks he's taking the easy path. Like you're giving up, you're taking the easy path because of our personalities don't match. And it's just like, oh, point on his part, but I think she's so down, like locked in that she's not able to see this right now. And so she gets up, she goes to her bedroom, she calls her dad and explains how Carl just came to the conversation. So clearly, like she already had a conversation with her dad telling him like, yeah, Carl wants to have this conversation, obviously because cameras are being picked up. So she's already knowing like something's up. And then she's like, he decided to call off the wedding. So then it cuts to Carl and a producer in the kitchen. And then he's like, am I crazy? I feel like I'm crazy half the time. I'm constantly questioning my sanity. And he's like, I want it to work, but don't understand how it can. Okay, so look, this is hard because they both have gaslit one another. Lindsay has gaslit Carl at the beginning of the season. We saw it in the points where, especially that one scene where they were sitting on that dock, that's those stairs leading down to a dock. I don't know if that was at Dockers or where it was, but it was a Sunday afternoon and they were all there. I think it was a Sunday. And in that moment, I felt for Carl. I really felt bad for him. I'm like, oh my God, she's not listening. She is gaslighting the shit out of him. Gaslighting is a trait of someone who tends to have narcissistic qualities. Again, I'm not calling either of them a narcissist. But in those moments, they've both taken part in gaslighting one another. And when you're being gaslit, you do question your own sanity. You're like, am I taking crazy pills? The amount of times I was gaslit in my relationship where I'm like, am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? So I feel for Carl in this moment because I don't think he's completely wrong. I don't think he's wrong in what he's saying here. The problem is that they're both in this situation. I think they're both gaslighting the shit out of one another at varying times. And so this whole thing's a mess. It's totally a mess. And so then it cuts to Lindsay and her dad on the phone, and her dad says to her, no, he's had enough. This just doesn't happen over 2 weeks. And Lindsay's like, it's unfair. And so her dad's recognizing, no, Lindsay, like this isn't just about the 2 weeks. Like this has got to be something that's been on his mind for a lot longer. And we all know it has been. We've seen it. And Lindsay should have been clued into this as well if she wasn't so caught up in all of the wedding planning and just, focusing on like, okay, we're getting married and all of that. And then, we cut to Carl and the producer, and Carl goes, Lindsay's blind. She's like, it's been fight after fight. And here we find out that they've actually even had noise complaints from people in their building. The landlords had to call them because they're getting noise complaints. So they've had some pretty big blowouts, it sounds like. And I don't think it's just all been Lindsay arguing or it's only been Carl. It's probably been both of them going at it. And Carl then says, I'm always going to lose. She's going to spin this and tell everybody she's blindsided. I'm going to be the asshole again. My life will be canceled. She'll be the fallen woman that everyone feels sorry for her. Okay, so now we understand why he's waited so long to do this. This is the fear. This was what a lot of his anxiety was around, that was causing him to just be like, so unable to communicate honestly with Lindsay because he was fearing the outcome of social media, the internet, all of that. And let's face it, the internet's brutal, brutal as fuck. And so, I mean, as someone who is somewhat of, in the public, I have my podcast, I have my YouTube channel, I have my Instagram and all of that. And yeah, you get comments from people who are disagreeing with you and they'll just start saying some of the most hateful, awful things. And so, he's clearly on an extremely large scale of receiving that. And so I understand, as someone who's going through their sobriety and doesn't know how to navigate their own feelings yet, and is trying to learn how to navigate their own feelings without resorting to escapism such as alcohol. Yeah, I can see why this would be an extremely difficult thing for him to figure out how to navigate. So then we cut to 48 hours later, Danielle's apartment. So in Danielle's apartment, Paige and Amanda are there, and they're like talking about like, how did you find out? How did you find out? And we find out like Danielle found out the next morning. But Kyle, Amanda's like, well, you can tell Amanda's like, well, I kind of knew something might be going down because Kyle got a call Tuesday night from producers that they're going to pick up cameras. They want to film him with Carl the next morning. So then Gabby arrives and Paige lets them know, like, yeah, I texted Carl to tell him he'll be okay. And Gabby's like, you texted Carl and all this stuff. And there's this thing of like, you can see Gabby for sure, and a little bit of Danielle are like, no, Carl maliciously planned all of this just to take Lindsay down. And Amanda and Paige are on the opposite side, like, no, I don't think it's like, it's not that cut and dry. I don't think that he would do that intentionally. I don't think it's that easy or that simplified. And so they're kind of disagreeing on that. And, you can see them kind of going back and forth. Like Amanda's like, no, like, look, he had to make a really tough decision. And so Paige says he did them both a favor. And Amanda also is like, what they, because like then Gabby's like, oh, he says really fucked up things to her. And she's like, they both say fucked up things to each other. And it's true. They're just both not healthy for one another. They both bring out the worst in one another. But these relationships, what is the silver lining of these relationships? They force us to go into a deeper form of our own healing if we choose, and become better people for the next partner. So, they realize what's going on here is that they're arguing over the way he did it versus the bigger picture. So then, Ciara's come in as well, and Ciara like wants to know from Danielle, like, what are your thoughts on all of this? Because last year, Danielle took a lot of heat for saying, I think they're moving too fast. I don't think they should be getting engaged right now. And, Danielle's like, I'm not wanting to have like an I told you so moment, even though she kind of did. But, she really kind of navigated it pretty well here. But she's like, yeah, this is the very thing I wanted them to avoid. Like that I felt like they were moving too fast, and rightfully so. Like when someone's going through their sober journey, they should not be making big life decisions while they're navigating their sobriety so early on. So then, they talk about how Amanda's like really empathizing. She's like, look, this was a lose-lose situation. He's damned if he does, he damned if he doesn't, and it's true. It's really true because had they gone on through the wedding and he had not said anything and we had all seen, we'd be like, dude, why didn't you just call it off? Like, I can't tell you how many guys I've been on dates with who have been previously married. They're now divorced. And I would say 8 to 9 out of 10 of them will tell me they knew they were unhappy before they got married. The day they got married, they knew they shouldn't be getting married. Leading up to the wedding, they knew they shouldn't be getting married, but they still do. And hats off to Carl for having, let's just say it, he really did have the balls to finally do this. He really he got into his masculine energy. He made a really big decision. It wasn't easy, and he certainly did the right thing here, and he deserves respect for that. Now, how he went about it, not the greatest, but they both didn't go about this the greatest way all summer. So then, Lindsay arrives, and what I think is so funny is the girls are like, "Oh my God, you're crying. We weren't expecting you to be crying." And I'm like, "What?" She just got broken up on national television, from an engagement, not just a relationship, 2 months out from her wedding. Like, how can you not expect her to be crying? Like, that's how much people think Lindsay is like this indestructible, like unbreakable kind of personality, like nothing like hurts her. And this couldn't be further from the case. And so what we find out here is, Paige says to her, "You didn't want to marry that man. Let him go." And Lindsay's like, "I cannot understand this. He humiliated me. Like, I was his best friend of 8 years. How could he do this to me? This is the person I've always been." Okay. This is where it all hit me. Like, boom. I was like, I now understand where Lindsay's coming from, because I'm like, there's no way she can feel blindsided. Like, she just cannot. Like, you can't have all of this happening in front of you. Can't, these arguments, like, you're participating in it. You can't think, when he's telling you, "I'm having doubts, I'm have whatever," you can't say that. However, what I think she's so blindsided by is that she's like, "How did you not know this was me? You've known me for 8 years. And so you get together with me. You tell me you love me. You tell me you want to marry me. You propose to me. We get 2 months away from walking down the aisle together. And then you tell me I'm not who you want. I'm not who you need." That I can totally understand being blindsided. That is where the blindsided, I think, is really coming in for her. That makes total sense for me. So I finally, like, I'm understanding. But now, does that take away? Like, you can't say you're blindsided by him calling off the wedding when you guys have been having so many issues. But here's the thing. Oh, when you're a person like Lindsay, and I understand because I can be the same way. You're a fighter. She's a solution oriented person. She's like, "Okay, how do we solve this? We can solve this." There isn't a problem that you can't solve, which is how you navigate life. It's how you get to where you get when you're Lindsay, like the career and everything that she's built for herself and how she's survived and like build things for herself. You get that from constantly always being like, "Okay, there's a solution to this problem." You're never bogged down by the problem. You're always like solution directive. So this is hard because she then opens up about how she has loved him since before they even got together. She's loved him since she's met him, pretty much, and she used to compare other guys to Carl when she was on dates with him or in relationships. And she's opens up like, "I was waiting for him. And, like, I waited for him." She was like, "So what? We've had fights. So what?" And Paige is like, "No, Lindsay, you weren't happy. Like, you deserve way more happiness than what you experienced with Carl," which is so true. So Lindsay was settling and she didn't even realize it. She had gotten so caught up in all of the desire that she had for Carl from the beginning started to override the current reality of what she was experiencing with him. So again, she had bought into the illusion of who she thought he was or what she felt for him from the beginning and thought it was going to be that way. I've been this in this position before too, where there was someone who I fell in absolutely in love with, was convinced they were my person. And I spent years waiting for them when they would get into other relationships. I would compare when I was in relationships with other guys, I'd compare them to him. No one ever matched up to this guy. And then finally, when I finally, thank God, I was never in the position where we got back together and continued onward that way. Whereas I found someone who showed me there was better than him, and I could see it all. So that when I actually um, later on, like I'm single again, and this person that I fell in love with comes back into my life, like I started to see who they really were, and I'm like, wow, what the hell was I so in love with? Like, this person's trash. The way they treat me is trash. Like, what was I settling for? And it was this feeling of like connection and all of that. But the truth is that for me in that moment, my connection was based off of a very unhealthy way of perception of what love was. Again, I always felt like I had to chase love with my dad because he was never around, not because he didn't want to be, just because of the way the dynamics were. And so, because I always felt like I had to chase this person's love, I thought that it felt that deep connection of the love I was always looking for with my dad. And so, when I finally realized and started to do all that healing, when I came back around to this guy, I'm like, well, this isn't the version of love I want anymore. Like, this is not love. And I was like, what the hell was I doing? And like, this is why it's so important to do our healing work. This is why it's so important to go on this healing journey. And so we finish off with a very Sex in the City moment here in New York with all the girls sitting on the couch. And it's like a Carrie Bradshaw, Mr. Big moment where, like the wedding's been called off. Mr. Big walks away and she's supposed to go on her honeymoon to Mexico. Well, they were supposed to get married in Mexico. And so now the girls are like, oh, let's all go to Mexico together. And so they all start laughing. And it was a very Sex in the City, Carrie Bradshaw, Mr. Big moment. So that's where we ended off with Summer House. And so that was a very long, long one. Valley will not be anywhere near as long. I say that now, who knows? But let me know what you thought about that in the comments. Let me know what you think about the whole breakup. Or I don't believe in doing the team Lindsay, team Carl kind of thing. Like, I can see both their sides. I would say that, because of what I've been through and what I have had to heal from, I can understand Lindsay's perspective and I resonate a little more with what she's going through. However, I can see why, like, I wouldn't want to date Lindsay. Like, I'm like, no way. Like if I was a guy, I'd be like, no fucking way. Not if I was, she has a very hard edge to her. And some guys love that. And she's just got to find a guy who loves that if that's how she wants to continue being in life. I had a very hard edge to myself as well. I've learned to soften it. It's been a good healing thing for me because I've realized I actually like myself more with a softer side. And so that might be something she discovers down the road in her own journey. Who knows? Maybe not. But like she's dating someone new now and I cannot wait for the reunion. So, oh, it's going to be good. Like this whole season has been so good. Like I've loved pretty much every episode. So like that rarely happens for these reality TV shows. So let's head into the valley. All right. So we get to the valley and we are at Big Bear Lake. And so the girls are setting up for their baby shower and Nia is asking if things are okay between Britt and Jax. And Brittany is telling Michelle like that, she goes, well, did you to talk about your text with Jesse? And this is where Michelle starts talking about, yeah, he's been in therapy and he's actually doing really well in therapy. It's been really good for him. He's all into it. She goes, but he's kind of like, that's his personality. He's like all in or nothing. But now, she's realizing that she's not that attracted to him because Brittany's like, are you even attracted to him anymore? And she's like, no, I'm not. And she feels bad for him. But she's like, everything he does on a day-to-day bothers me. And she's like, not happy. And she's afraid to be the bad person to break it off, which we've all been there. but at the end of the day, you can't stay with someone that, you're not happy with. And then, of course, it cuts back over to the boat where the guys are, they're fishing, and Jesse's talking about marriage being tough. And so next we find out, that Janet comes out. She's very touched by the surprise. She wasn't expecting it. And then she's like, I don't want to be stressed by someone when I'm pregnant. And she's talking about, oh, why am I forgetting his name all of a sudden? Because like I really like him. Um, oh my God, what's his name? I gotta go back to my Zach. She's talking about Zach doing that geotag story, and it's like, girl, I'm sorry, but you're pregnant. Do not bring on the drama yourself. Do not stir the pot if you're not ready to handle it. You do not get all these I'm pregnant, get out of jail free cards when you're the one causing the drama. So she's like, I don't want to be stressed by someone when I'm pregnant. And she's like having it's just that was just ridiculous to me. So then she starts talking about how she's having dreams about her baby now. And uh, this is interesting because what happens on a spiritual level when women are either about to get pregnant or are pregnant is they start communicating with their baby. This is what's so important is that the baby is already communicating needs or wants. She's like, she's seeing how she's like setting up the nursery, and it's like the baby can tell you like what colors they're going to want or what kind of theme they want, or all those kind of like these are real things that a lot of women can tap into when they're pregnant and the baby is already communicating. So it's kind of cool that she says that. And then she starts talking about like, her labor plans and how she wants to do a vaginal birth, like if everything goes well. But here's when all the girls start talking about all their horror stories of the labor. And it's just like, oh my God, maybe not the right time, ladies, to be going into this. And then because they start freaking her out. But then we get to Danny is drinking a lot. They've come off the fishing boat. Danny has been going to town on the alcohol. And so he's hugging Jesse in the car. He's farting in the car. And so when the men return, Jesse's like, says to Nia, he's like, you need to get out your mop and broom and clean up this mess, like, because he's a disaster. But so they're all realizing, okay, they got to get ready. They're going to have their fantasy dinner and they've got a private chef coming in. And it cuts to Kristen briefly asking her if she's like, she's having FOMO for missing out. And she's like, no, I'm having JOMO, joy of missing out. And so then Jason is dressing up as a hot dog because Janet loves hot dogs. So that's her fantasy. So he's dressing up as a hot dog. Janet is dressing up as vanilla because apparently Jason just loves anything like vanilla when it comes to sex, like mission. It's just, he's like, just a few little, we don't need all the things, just one or two things. Who needs to do all those different positions? Like, just do what works and on with it. I'm like, okay, so he's very vanilla. So she's dressing up as vanilla, which is cute. Danny and Nia. Okay, so Nia was supposed to dress up as ranch dressing because I guess that's what Danny loves. But her costume never arrived. And then Danny is dressing up as Jamie Fraser from Outlander because that's one of Nia's fantasies, which I love the show Outlander. What a great show that is. Michelle and Jesse. Okay, so Jesse is dressed up as Harry Styles, and Michelle has dressed up as a booty call that she used to be when things were good between their marriage, or even when they were dating. Brittany's a puck bunny. Jax is a basketball player, an NBA player. So, anyways, they go to dinner, and it's got like this aphrodisiac component. And he talks about the aphrodisiacs being oysters, which okay, totally get that. And I know that garlic's an aphrodisiac, but I just don't think it's the best aphrodisiac. Like I really don't get that one. I just don't see how it works out so well. So anyway, Danny is progressively getting drunker and drunker and gets triggered by Jesse's comment, you're not a great actor, because he's not doing a very great Scottish accent. And Michelle in this moment, talk about awful timing. Like, and she's just, Michelle knows what she's doing here. She brings up the houses and locations about going to the West Hollywood and showing like, condo, 3 bedrooms, being near friends and stuff. And this is where Jesse, no, it's not Jesse, sorry. This is where Danny is like, who has three kids here? Who has three kids? Basically not understanding like the position that they're in and how hard it is. And like, he's like, we need more space. We're on top of each other. And it's true, like if you've got three under two, where they do in this moment, and you've got a small apartment or condo that you're living in, and you're trying to be the best father you can, Nia's trying to be the best mother that she can, and you're trying to like also keep your marriage intact. You having some space is very helpful in cushioning, giving some cushion to the situation, right? But um what I don't like that is done here in this particular moment is like Brittany, I think it was Brittany saying like, "Oh, but Nia has three kids under two too. It's not just you." And it's like that wasn't what he was implying. And I hate it when women do this. It's like give the guy a break. Like he's not saying he's the one doing all the work. That was very obvious to me. He's just expressing his situation. And I don't like how the girls go in and it's like, oh yeah, you're acting like, you're the one feeding the kids, that they're on your boob and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, he's not. Like he's actually probably doing one of the best jobs, certainly out of this entire group, of being a stand-up husband and father to his children. And the guy just needs some slack. Like cut him some slack. And I just don't like how the girls go in on him here because it's like girls, I don't know, women these days, like they just don't cut any guys any slack, but they want all the slack for themselves. And I just don't like where our society's going with all of this. It's like a guy cannot do anything right, but a girl can do everything wrong. And it's not so bad, like it's just, I don't like it. So anyways, that's what came up here. But you can see, this is what I actually really, like. These two have clearly had a conversation behind closed doors when cameras were not rolling. And I actually listened to a podcast. They were on Nick Vile's podcast, and I listened to and they clarified where they had an agreement. One, they said, if our marriage starts to suffer because of the show, we're going off the show because our marriage comes first. And they also talked about how in their family, it's not their kids that come first, it's their marriage that comes first. The two of them come first. Excellent perspective. It is the way it's supposed to be. You should never put your kids before the relationship of the husband and wife, because if that falls apart, then the kids will not have the family that they deserve. And so I love that they said that. But basically, Nia's like wanting it to be private here. She's trying to like get him to quiet down and not like have this big spectacle, because she knows they've made agreements. And then it cuts back where Jason's like, yeah, you can't leave now, because every time that he's gotten drunk, she's like, oh, we've got a text from the babysitter. We got to go home, and they've had it planned so that she can always get him out of the situation so that he doesn't put off a display of something where he's going to be embarrassed or ashamed of on national television. Look, that is a woman who's got her husband's back. That I love that she's doing that. And I'll bet you they've talked about that. And it sounds like from what I have heard. And this is what partnership's about. It's like, she's not trying to control him here. She's like having his back, but he's so drunk right now that he's like not realizing. He's like, you fucked me over. And then she's like, you just said fuck to me on national television. And then so like, she's like telling him like, dude, like, this is not us, and this is not what we agreed upon. And so it shows how they remove themselves when Danny gets drunk. And, again, like Nia has every right to. So it cuts to the next morning, and we see Jesse and Michelle, and they played it off kind of, okay, this is where Jesse's like starts talking about how he played off the text messaging thing kind of standoffishly. So he clearly had some deeper feelings than he let on in the conversation when Jackson, Michelle, and him were talking about. He's like, don't worry, I trust my wife. I'm going to do this. But deep down, he's starting to question it. Why? Because they had sex this morning. And so, he's starting to add things up, because he's like, why would someone say or make up that you're sending sexy photos to other men? And basically they had sex, and that morning, and her eyes were closed, and it was like he wasn't even there. It's like he was having sex with someone who literally wasn't consciously in the room and didn't want to be there. And he felt that. And so he felt that lack of connection, and he felt how I think he's really having a very fast moving realization roller coaster ride of my marriage is over. And what I don't like here is that he says to her, "You won't let me touch your phone." Things start to add up. And Michelle, gets defensive and then gaslights him. It's like, no, he actually is in the right. If you're hiding your phone from your partner, that's just bizarre behavior. So, I mean, I don't advocate for going through your partner's phone. I don't think that's right. But also, it's like, if you feel like you need to constantly hide your phone and turn it down and like all that kind of stuff, like that's suspect behavior. So his intuition is starting to ping here. Like maybe there's truth to the text. And then he's like saying, like, how foolish would we look if we spent all this money on marriage counseling only for you to be like doing this behind my back, like, and I agree with him, like, why are you going through all of this marriage counseling, spending all this money, when you're out of it already? So then, and I will say, if Michelle has been cheating on him, which I think she has been, like it pretty much looks that way. I would be surprised if she really wasn't. But yeah, like that's like you don't do that to your marriage. Like you don't step out on your partner. Like if you are not happy, then get divorced and then start dating someone else. So then we go back to Janet and Brittany. They're having breakfast. They go out to the swing so that Janet can talk to Brittany one on one. They start talking about Jax's treatment of Brittany and how he's like, been accusing her of drinking and all of that. And, Brittany's talking about, yeah, his delivery's horrible and like how embarrassed she is and how embarrassed she becomes when he does this to her. And then, Janet's like talking like, well, I know that divorce is not an option for you guys. And she's like, well, no, actually, divorce is a path I would go down. So this is the first time where Brittany has said out loud that divorce is something that she would consider. And Jax is just not simply doing the things that she's not even doing the simple things, I should say. So they're not having sex. She doesn't feel attractive anymore towards like, she's like feeling like, I don't feel like he thinks I'm attractive. And so then she also is like, we have been planning to have a baby for a year. And then he goes and starts this business, this sports bar, which he's already opened. And, that took over all of the plans that they were to have another baby together. And so then we cut to Nia and Danny now going for a walk and discussing the lack of emotional connection to the community and how Danny wants to, basically, she's like, I know you want to move, you want more space, but you want me to move into a community that I have no connection to. And I am really going through this place where I need support, I need connection and friendships to me more than ever. And this conversation is such a masterclass on how partners should communicate with one another. Like I watch this and go, wow, what a great example of how two people, never mind married, but just in a relationship, how they should be communicating. And I think this is why people love them and their marriage so much. But basically, he's like, I want you to be happy. And um, he's like so desperately wants her to be happy, but her depression has better days, right? And bad days. And she says to him, I want you to take time away for yourself when I have those happier days. Like, I don't want you to feel like you need to be around me all the time and take care of me. Like, you've got to take care of yourself too. And I want you to have those moments where you can just go and do the things for yourself. So I love that. I love that they're both looking out for one another and they're both making each other a priority and seeing where each other needs what they need. This is so good. Such great communication. And I love how they were both very vulnerable with one another, like they were just open, honest, really saying what's on their heart. So then, everyone leaves Big Bear. Now we cut to a final lunch scene. It's a gentleman's lunch at Via Alloro. And it's a gentleman's lunch that Jesse does on Fridays. And he's been talking about it to Jackson's like telling him to come. And, Jesse talks about how like the most, I guess, like the craziest Friday night lunch they've ever had, or Friday lunch, like gentleman's lunch that they've ever had was for four people, $20,000 bill, 5-course meal. So I was like, wow, wow, $5,000 per person. Like that's some serious wine you've been drinking. And I would like to be at that lunch next time. I mean, Italian, hello, it's one of my favorites. And Italian wine, I love it. So anyways, they're at this lunch and there are other men there that none of us know. And I feel sorry for these men. I like the fact that these men have to sit here and film such a show. But it's Jesse. Jax talks about his awareness of his marriage, which is so far off. His awareness of what his marriage actually is so far off base. And Jesse says, I think it's worse for Brittany more than you think. So Jesse's trying to bring Jax's awareness back to reality and saying, like, dude, I think you're like sugarcoating it. I think you're missing something very important that you need to start looking at. And he's trying to warn him. He's like that maybe Jax is being a little blind here. And yeah, Jax is being really blind here. But of course, because of who it's coming from, Jesse, who has an absolutely failing marriage, which is on the brink of divorce, Jax is not receiving it. So, but here we see Jesse like goes to her, would you let her leave? And Jax is like, no, I would not let her leave. She'll never leave me. And it's like, okay, so that's where we end. And just realizing like, you see how much Jax is taking for granted who Brittany is and her generosity over the years. Because she allowed him, because he cheated on her and they got back together and she ended up getting married to him, he has this idea in his head that she will never leave him. Sorry, but a woman has a breaking point, Jax. And I'm surprised her breaking point hasn't come sooner, but we now see her breaking point has arrived and he has used up all of his 9 lives in this relationship. He doesn't have any more to go through. Jax is pretty much dead here. So this is where we end off on the show. It wasn't a fulfilled episode. Like, it was a good episode. It was fun, but nowhere near as juicy as Summer House. So this is where we're at. And I wish that the Valley was going to have a reunion. I'm kind of bummed that they're not going to have a reunion because I just think there's so much that we could be talking about with Jax and Brittany being separated, with, the divorce between Michelle and Jesse. It would be a good reunion, but I don't know why they're not doing it. Anyway, there will be Summer House reunion next week. I can't wait for it. Guys, let me know how you love the episode. Again, as we go through this, I use these as canvases to really navigate relationship dynamics, the healing journey, different things, the kind of communication issues, what we need, how we can be more aware of things, that how like the perception lens of how things can be so different for other people when other people are like, how did you not see it? So it's really interesting how we can all get locked up in our own illusions and our own fantasies. But I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And I did use the Summer House one to share some of my more vulnerable moments in my past relationship that I haven't really discussed before. So if you're listening to this show, you got a little sneak peek of more of my life. With that being said, guys, I love you so much. Don't forget, if you need your own personal session with me to book, you can use the links below to go to my website to book a session with me. Or, of course, if you're thinking about having that transformative event that could totally change your life, it could open your heart. If you're looking to open your heart to love deeper, to know what love truly feels like, to feel love, and this is so important. Because when it comes to receptivity, when it comes to being able to receive more abundance in your life, you have to know how to love, because you need to know how to allow love into yourself. It is one of the main principles of abundance. So if you're looking for a very transformative 3-day event, I highly suggest you consider coming to the Forbidden Journey Retreat, September 18th, 2024 in Breckenridge, Colorado. Guys, I love you so much, and I'll see you very soon. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.